All right, hey folks, so welcome back to part 2 in this fasting series. Now, the first video looked at my history of fasting, so going back almost 2 decades, and I also listed a bunch of positives and negatives of fasting. Some of the ones which you may have thought of immediately, some ones which you may not have thought of, and what I want to do is today carry that on with having a look at specific types of fasting schedules. So there are 50 different types of fasting schedules. Now, I'm going to lay out 6 of the ones that I've personally had experience with. So I want to talk about things from my own personal experience, give you guys some pros and cons about each individual style and schedule of fasting, and then talk a bit about also how you can get involved in each of these and how you can do them. So let's begin. First one we're going to talk about is possibly the one which I guess is fasting 101. You know, it's the one which most people's first experiences with fasting are, and that is the classic skip breakfast 16-8 fasting protocol, the one that Martin Berkhan really popularized around about 2005 when he came out with a whole rash of information, and he came out with his Leangains website. There's been a ton of research on this area too, because prior to 2005, the research done on fasting was all for sort of long-term fasting, like 24-hour, 48-hour and longer fasts. So this Martin Berkhan was really the guy who brought fasting to the masses, and he came up with this approach, which was 16-8, 16-hour fasting window and 8-hour eating window. This was the one that I've had my first experience with, and essentially it's quite simple. You just skip breakfast. And I know there'll be some fasting zealots out there who go, fast, it's more than skipping breakfast. Like, yeah, okay, it is. There's a lot more to it, but if I'm trying to present this to a general audience, you know, to somebody who's never fasted before, it's basically just skipping breakfast. Now, there are a few different types of schedules for this. So the most common way to arrange this is to skip your breakfast, push your first meal back till about 12 o'clock. Okay. Now, there'll also be some people who will say, well, actually, breakfast is just the first meal of the day. You break your fast, blah, 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 blah. You'll find that as you delve deeper into fasting circles, people start to get more and more weird about what their idea of normal is. So in any case, we get all that. We get the definitions. But look, just have your first meal at about 12. Have your last meal at about 8 p.m. So finish eating by about 8 p.m. So it gives you 8 hours to eat, which means the rest of the time you're not eating. And that gives you a ratio of 1/3 of your life eating, 2/3 not eating, which is a lot better than what most people have. Like we know from the research that's available to us in 2022, most people will have around about 8 feedings per day, right across the day. So that's meals, snacks, little bites, and nibbles, all that kind of stuff. So the best thing about this is it starts to get you to have some periods of your life where you're just not digesting food, and that has a lot of benefits. Now, the 12 to 8 fasting window itself is quite good because of this very simple reason. Most people tend to be busiest in the mornings. Most people who have like regular 9-to-5 jobs tend to be busiest in the morning. So during the morning time when you're busy, this means you don't have to eat. You don't have to sit down and eat, and everything that comes with eating, which is digesting the food. You know, after a big meal, you tend to feel a bit sluggish. You don't get that if you just fast the right way through. This actually runs counter to some of the myths around when you should eat. A lot of people still hold on to this belief that you should eat when you're most active because that's giving your body the energy it needs when it needs it. If you think about it, though, and how the body works, that's really quite a disastrous way of looking at things, because eating takes energy. It takes blood flow, you know, eating takes energy. So when you're most active, when you want your brain to be at its sharpest, when you want your body to be at its sharpest, let's say you've got a very mentally demanding job or a very physically demanding job, well, too bad, because your body is diverting resources towards digesting the food you just ate. So it doesn't make sense, does it? You know? So I think that's something to bear in mind with that common myth of eat when you're the most active. Not actually true. And your body doesn't work on an hour-by-hour basis. Oftentimes, the worst thing to do is eat. I mean, imagine if you ate directly before you went out for a run or for a sprint. It's not going to work. Or, you know, back in hunter-gatherer times, if you just finished a big meal and you wouldn't go out to a hunt because you just want to lie down, relax, you know, take a weight off. So that whole myth about eating when you're supposed to, when you do your most activity, it's not really born in reality. And this type of schedule sort of goes along with that, and the idea that, okay, actually eat more when you're starting to rest and relax. And then that also supports people being more relaxed. So people tend to relax after a meal. Some people find it easier to go to sleep after they've had something to eat. So there is that. Now, the other eating window is 7 till 3 p.m. Now, I'd say the one advantage of this eating window is that it's likely better for sleep if you can cope with it psychologically, because while eating before bed is a reasonably good idea, directly before bed tends to be problematic, because when you sleep, you're supposed to be in this sort of rest and digest sort of mode of being, okay? Specifically, resting. Now, the idea is, as you're resting, everything in your body is going to slow down somewhat. You know, you're going to just relax. Now, if you're having to digest a bunch of food while you're sleeping, it's probably going to affect your sleep quality. And I know it does for me. If I have to digest a lot of food while I'm trying to sleep, I'll always have disturbed sleep. I can generally get to sleep pretty well, but if I'm eating, my heart rate will be up while I'm sleeping, and it's not good for sleep quality. So with the 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. window, you definitely avoid that, as long as psychologically you can cope with not having a bit of a snack before bed. And also, an 8-hour window is enough to consume all the nutrients. Like, you're not going to struggle to have your protein within 8 hours. It's a reasonable eating window, you know, unless you're like very, very big, in which case you're probably not fasting. So this is possibly the easiest way to get into fasting, and it's what most people start with, okay? So this is a good way to do things. Now, the next schedule, which I also think is relatively easy to get into, and it has some benefits, but this is also quite an extreme method of fasting, because with this, which is basically the one meal a day or a very shortened eating window, you're into a situation where about anywhere between 10 to 20% of your time is spent eating, and 80 to 90% of your time is spent fasting. Now, that's a long time. It's a large step up from the previous one, which was 1/3 to 2/3. So while this sort of warrior diet, OMAD type of thing, it looks a bit more doable. It certainly looks more doable than, 24 or 48-hour fast. It's still pretty hardcore. It's still pretty extreme. Having one meal a day is still pretty tough. Now, with regards to that, yeah, you have an eating window of around about 1 to 4 hours, which is what most people do, which means your fasting window is anywhere between 20 to 23 hours. Now, if you're doing an OMAD style, so that's literally just one meal a day, it's more in the full fasting thing, and you don't eat anything during the course of the day. When you're doing it as more of a warrior diet, Ori Hoffelmeister, who's, I think is his name, if I'm butchering that name, he's the guy who sort of popularized the warrior diet. He suggests that you have some small bits of food throughout the day, throughout the fasting period. Fasting zealots won't like that, but it's not the end of the world as far as I'm concerned. The advantage of this type of daily fast is that you can integrate it into your daily routine. Most of us live fairly regimented lives, so doing this type of routine, this type of dieting schedule, means you can arrange your day so you're dieting in this way. Like, for example, a lot of guys who fast in this way, like my brother does this fairly regularly, he's a family man, and he works at a regular job. He doesn't necessarily want to be sitting at work breaking bread with his work colleagues, when he'd rather be eating and relaxing a bit more with his family in the evening. So he opts to have the majority of his calories in the evening, so that he can be a little bit looser with his food choices, which I think is fine. I think that's a good way of doing things. So it's a way where you can fit it around your daily schedule and where your priorities are. Now, the other advantage about this is, even if you are fasting what is a large portion of the day, 80 to 90% of the day, you're still eating every day. So no matter what, you're still eating every single day. I think the downside to this approach is that it requires a lot more attention to detail with regards to protein intake and nutrients. It almost mandates really good food choices. So if you're thinking about doing this and just filling up with a lot of cakes and snacks and stuff, I would caution you on that, because to get in the amount of protein and nutrients you need on a daily basis in just a short eating window, you're going to have to really pick some good choices, and you may have to supplement with protein shakes. Now, if you think you can do all that and slam in a bunch of cakes on top of that, well, it's going to be tough to fit everything in with your allotted calories, including your protein as well. So bear in mind, this shortened eating window, it's literally just so you can have big meals. It's not so you can have completely different food choices. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. And it's sort of what I covered in some of the downsides of fasting. Doesn't always, in the previous episode, doesn't always teach you about what to eat during the time you are eating. And I think that's where the warrior diet or the OMAD, it can begin to delve into that territory where people are using this almost as an excuse to justify eating crap for that one meal, which is going to have a massive knock-on effect with how many nutrients they can get into that shortened eating window. Just something to bear in mind, if you're a guy is a reasonable size, and you need to get in anywhere between 150 to 200 grams of protein per day, 0.8 grams per pound, it's going to be tough to get that all into one meal if you also insist on eating a bunch of crap on top of it. So you got to be careful with this one, is what I'm trying to say. The shorter the eating window, the more you have to be really careful about your protein intake. Otherwise, you are going to run the risk of getting some fairly mediocre results in terms of body composition. The weight will still come off if you stick to your calories, but body composition is a different matter, and it's a lot harder to judge that over time. So you might think you're getting good results and the weight's dropping great, but at the end of 3 months, you may be disappointed. It's just worth bearing in mind. All right, now I'm just going to end today's video with what is probably my favorite form of fasting and the one that I always come back to, which is 1 or 2 24-hour fasts per week. Now, the way that this is set up is so you still eat every day. Now, look, the wording says 24-hour, okay? So it's not like you just don't eat Monday, okay? Because if you didn't eat Monday and you ate, say, Sunday and Tuesday, well, that would actually be a 36-hour fast because you have sleep bookending the day. But a 24-hour fast is usually something like 6 p.m. on one day to 6 p.m. the next day, or 8 p.m. to 8 p.m., or 12 p.m. to 12 p.m. It means you're still eating every single day. Now, I come back to this as one of my favorite ways of fasting because it means that you're eating normally most of the time. You can get all the benefits of fasting, and all you need to do is just stop eating during your last evening meal on one day, roll over into the next day, skip probably a couple of meals, breakfast, lunch, then eat again at dinner. It's relatively simple. You sleep through a large portion of it. You sleep through a third of it, ideally. So let's give you a sample schedule. Let's say you... I do it Mondays. If I'm going to do it, I do it Mondays because Mondays is a very convenient day because Mondays is super busy for me. So Sunday night, I'll have my last meal. I'll finish eating, say, about 7 o'clock. Okay. Monday morning rolls around, and then I'll go to bed a few hours later. Monday morning rolls around. I'm dead busy. I'll just load up on water, coffee, whatever. Work all through the day. In the early afternoon or late afternoon, evening time, I'll go and train. And then as soon as I'm finished training, about 6:30, 7 o'clock, I'll be at home and I'll be having a meal. So that's a 24-hour fast. Right at the end of it, I'll have a training period and then go straight into my feed. And it's pretty well tolerated. I mean, I've never had a problem with energy with that approach. It's always been fine. And since I'm eating immediately after a 24-hour fast, I don't really think is too much of an issue with muscle loss. I think all I'm really doing is optimizing my body to soak in all those nutrients after 24 hours. So it's quite a good approach. It's not that difficult. 24-hour fast for me right now, I can do pretty easily. They're fine. The nice thing about a 24-hour fast rather than a daily schedule is you can get, or you can utilize some of the supplements. So you can utilize caffeine, Like, I wouldn't recommend just smashing caffeine every day to get through, 16-8 schedule. Because I think that's the problem with 16-8 schedules. You end up in a very sort of stressful kind of situation. Sometimes people can end up in a stressful situation where they're just smashing caffeine on a daily basis. So their mornings are literally just caffeine and nervousness, and caffeine and anxiety, the classic entrepreneur stack. But I think with a couple of 24-hour fasts, you can power through, use a bit of caffeine, to get yourself through the fast, and the rest of the week you're eating pretty normally. In fact, just one 24-hour fast really does a hell of a lot for you. And you'll notice it does a lot in terms of your appetite control, as long as you can prevent yourself from massively rebounding the other end. It's my personal favorite. I think you'll do well on this approach if you do have a relatively good eating pattern during the rest of the week. Like my eating pattern right now, I mostly eat meat, veg, and fruit. It's pretty much my entire week. So I eat pretty good the whole week. Now, if I have one 24-hour fast, it doesn't put much of a dent in my appetite. Like I don't really get massively hungry. I don't feel like eating a bunch of crap. It's just fairly well tolerated because my weekly eating schedule is quite regimented, quite disciplined. I have a good eating schedule. I think if you're just getting into fasting, you might struggle with this because you might have a sort of a rebound. Well, I'll qualify that. If you're just getting into fasting and you don't have a particularly great eating habit, let's say you are 30 to 50 pounds overweight. And I'm sorry, like if you're 30 to 50 pounds overweight, you don't have good eating habits, or otherwise you wouldn't be in that situation. Not to come across harsh, but I think I think a lot of times people don't realize how bad their eating is. They say, I'm 50 pounds overweight. I don't know what's going wrong. It's like, there are clearly issues. So anyway, back to what I was saying, if you don't have particularly great eating habits, as evidenced by the fact you are considerably overweight, then this is maybe not the best one to start with, because once you go back to eating, there'll be no cap on what you eat. So I think if you're already fairly regimented, if you're at a reasonable body fat, this is probably a decent one to go with. But you've just got to be careful about not blowing it out on the other end. So yeah, it's a good way of eating. I think this is one of my favorites. 1 or 2 24-hour fasts a week are very, very effective. I'll generally do a Monday because Monday are my busiest days. Right, folks, I'm going to call it there for this video. I wanted to cover the last 3 types of fasting in the next video, but hopefully you found that useful in covering the different fasting methods that I've personally used and also some of the pros and cons. But let me know down in the comments what you think of these that I just covered now, and also maybe some ideas for future fasting schedules. There'll be another video on this tomorrow in terms of the last 3 fasting regimens that I've personally done, which cover more longer fasts, more extreme fasting, so that should be quite interesting. But anyway, as always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Take care, bro.